Welcome to the road to Acapulco. There's a new idea in town, an idea that's been heralded by Bob Podolsky for 32 years. It's an idea that will change the world, and it's beginning to take shape in Acapulco.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of The Road to Acapulco.
Number 17.
Number 17. This is Michael Nimetz, and the great Bob Podolsky is with me today. Today we're recording this on the 6th of June, and 73 years ago today, the great American-led Allied effort to liberate Europe took place off the coast of France.
D-Day.
And everybody seems to think that was one of the most wonderful days.
Uh-huh.
Even though somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple 100,000 people lost their lives.
Right.
So what I wanted to use this for was an occasion to essentially talk about the circumstances that kind of surround war and how the Octologue and the further holomat would really prepare citizens and communities for not doing stupid things like going to war, and encourage people to see the benefits of not doing stupid things like going to war.
Right.
And hopefully seeing all the other stupid things that government does. Because essentially that's all they do, is they go to war, one thing after another. It might not be necessarily with guns, but it's other means, but typically it always is backed up with guns in one way or another. So I've kind of outlined a couple different things that I think the Octologue does that benefits humankind. And so I'll just outline them and then we can discuss each of them.
Okay.
But number one is truth, finding truth. Number two is, essentially encouraging free trade or interaction. I guess a third would be developing people from not being insecure about themselves and falling for some of the tricks of the government in regard to what is honorable to do. The fourth would be resources. Most wars are fought over resources of some sort, but they seem to overlook the greatest resource, the human mind. And then finally, confidence in humanity, which kind of goes along the lines with the idea of understanding that the human mind is the greatest resource we have, but really understanding that if we have confidence in humanity and our abilities and ourselves, there really is no problem that we can't resolve or potential conflict that can't be resolved without blowing each other's heads off.
Right.
And so let's go back to the beginning with truth.
Truth, yeah, okay.
So what does the Octologue do for us in regard to finding truth?
Several things. The Octologue is based on the ethics, and the ethics seek to maximize truth, awareness, love, and creativity, these four resources being logically equivalent in that if you increase one of them, they all increase. And if you limit or diminish one of them, they're all limited or diminished. So, focusing on truth, truth refers to true information. And I think it might be wise for us to briefly state how do we know when information is true? Because most people don't have a clue about how do you tell. They just think that truth is a matter of opinion. And anyone's opinion might be truth. And this is not so. It's not that easy. So true information is information which, when you believe it to be true, increases your intelligence. Now, intelligence I'm defining as the ability to predict and control events in the real world. So, for example, if I am holding something and I let it go, I expect it to fall. And in fact, I can write a pretty accurate equation that will describe how rapidly it accelerates, how far it falls in a given time, and so on. And anyone can perform the experiment to verify that. So that information about things fall can be found to be true because it allows us to predict what happens when you let go of something. Contrary-wise, false information is information which, when you believe it to be true, reduces your intelligence. Oh my gosh, the world is flat. Well, if I believe that, I can't navigate. Sorry, navigation doesn't work. I've done navigation, and any surveyor, any navigator, any aviator, any ship captain, or all these people know what they have to do to get from one distant point to another. And it depends upon recognizing the earth is not flat. If you believe the earth is flat, your intelligence has been diminished.
Well, what's worse is that if people believe something that isn't true, that's typically when wars are fought, or at least that's one of the ways that they get people to
Yes, that's
believe.
quite right. Quite right. In order to wage wars, get people to actually, pick up a gun, get on a plane, fly halfway around the world and shoot some stranger, people have to believe something that isn't true, generally. There may be a few exceptions, but they're very rare. And in general, if you want people to do things like that, and you haven't already conditioned them to accept such tasks, well, then you've got to tell them lies. Those are the enemy. They make our lives dangerous. We're not going to be safe until we go kill them, which is absurd. But it's persuasive to people who don't know any better and who don't know how to test information to find out if it's true.
Well, and also someone that participates in an octologue is essentially going to have the opportunity to test something that they believe against the beliefs of the other people in the octologue.
Right.
And more than likely, there's going to be if it's something that's obviously got some potential issues, those issues are going to be brought out because of the way that the octologue is structured.
Right.
The idea that, I am really essentially forced to give my opinion of something, because if we're all going to agree and to resolve something, if it's something that goes against my belief, then I have to veto that.
Right.
And then I have to explain why
right.
this is not a good idea.
Imagine a world where everyone in the world, and it'll never come to everyone, but if it did, this is the extreme case. Imagine a world where everyone works in an octologue instead of in a hierarchy. And then some government agent comes along and says, we have to go to war with such and such a country. They're dangerous. They're getting ready to bomb us. We have to go to war with them. And so I hear this tale, and I come back to my octologue, and I may be in more than one octologue. I may have one where I work, and a family octologue, and a neighborhood octologue. But I come back to one of my octologues, and I say, I heard we are being told we have to go to war. What do you think of that? Well, we've got at least, typically 7 more ideas, pairs of eyes and ears, analyzing what's going on. And the chances that we're all going to agree, we got to pick up and go to war, are pretty slim. Slim to none.
Yeah, well, imagine if it was something a little smaller, like, we need to demolish one of the neighbors' houses because we need to put a new library or something like that.
Right. Right. The same applies. It comes back to the non-aggression principle. And the non-aggression principle is based on a still more general ethical principle that one cannot achieve ethical ends by unethical means. That principle covers non-aggression and all the other possible happenings that have similar consequences to aggression. By the way, aggression, in its most general meaning of the word, means to reach out. It's like reaching out. And we've come to think of aggression as reaching out in hostility as opposed to reaching out in friendship. That cannot help but change when a lot of people are working in octologues, because in the octologue, these things become very clear. They get talked about, they get analyzed. Anyone who doesn't understand is educated by the process, and you wind up with people who are very peaceful and oftentimes very caring and empathic, and just whatever you would think the opposite of psychopathic would be, you know.
Yeah, and that's another thing is as octologues develop and holomats develop, essentially that the influence of trust and people that are honest being included, whereas people that are dishonest and would certainly fall into the category of psychopaths would have the most difficult time sticking in a society that is a holomat.
As a matter of fact, it's credible to me, I can't prove that this will happen, but it's credible to me that when most people are working in octologues within holomats, psychopathy and sociopathy might disappear completely in the course of a generation. If for no other reason than because we're going to be raising children differently than we do today, and the seeds of psychopathy are sown in early childhood, typically between 4 and 5 years old. There's some stretch to that, but that's usually when people become psychopathic or sociopathic for that matter, and that is an avoidable outcome when enough of us decide that we're going to stop abusing children. That's a big piece of what the Octologue teaches, is the soul bonding notion that until we treat our children peacefully, we're not going to have peace in the world. That's a big part of where war comes from, is this notion that it's okay to initiate violence against someone from whom you want something.
So the next thing I outlined was trade. Essentially, if you look at it from a country's point of view, trade would be the opposite of war. If you're trading with other countries, obviously that's beneficial to do that. But free trade can be basically taken down to the individual level, and that's essentially seeing value in other people. And certainly the Octologue is something that really promotes this idea and really makes it obvious, because as you become a member of an Octologue and you get to see the other's contributions, you really start to understand the value that each member has in that group, and of course in the larger group as well.
There is I don't remember the title, I'm sad to say, but there is a book by Robert McGee on this very topic of how trade mitigates against war. That if countries that trade with each other don't go to war with each other. It's not unlike a situation that used to occur from time to time in Europe, where royal families would go to live with each other. So two royal families might exchange princes and princesses. They'd go send their prince to live with some other family, and then they're not going to go to war with them because there's the risk of killing your own kin. Yeah. That's very similar. Another piece of that comes down to when we are trading with other people, we're more prosperous than we would be if we weren't trading. And people like prosperity. Usually people like prosperity enough that they're not going to give it up just on someone else's whim.
Well, and I'd like to kind of go into a little bit about trade, because, we hear a lot about free trade and trade agreements and stuff like that. But the reality is those are far from free trade agreements.
Right.
Most cases, they're benefiting one particular party at the expense of somebody else.
Or a lot of somebody else.
And I certainly don't want to make that associate ourselves with that kind of situation.
Well, I like the idea of sort of educating people that what governments call free trade is not free trade. It is just the opposite of free trade. It is limitations, restraints, and taxes on trade. Real free trade can be easily envisaged as the right of two people to form a contract with each other that is a valid ethical contract. Ethical contracts are well understood. Contract law has actually been written that is quite good. And if you go to the books and you look up contract law, you find out that almost everyone who writes about it says the same thing, that you have to have honest disclosure, you've got to have understanding as to who is contributing what, and what will each member of the contract receive from that partnership, under what circumstances, what does someone have to do to withdraw from a contract, what costs would be assumed in doing so, and so on. I mean, these parameters are well understood. And so if you have the right to form ethical contracts with anyone you want, then free trade is assured. It's only when that's interfered with by someone that we have problems, and governments always interfere in it.
Well, and that's another thing about the Octologue is when you're dealing with trustworthy people, you don't need all the fine print.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically understanding the basic principles of exchanging value.
Right, ethical principles.
And when that doesn't take place, there's essentially a mechanism for resolving that.
Right.
And that's also another part of the Octologue, which is kind of assuring fairness.
Right.
Because if somebody feels like they got the wrong end of the deal, they essentially have the veto power to say, hey,
right,
I'm not getting a fair deal here. I need to discuss this.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the group then has to discuss what is a fair deal and come to a resolution.
Right.
Where everybody agrees.
Exactly. And I've had many opportunities to observe the formation of different kinds of contracts. Manufacturing contracts, government contracts, private contracts, one-on-one contracts, and so on. And what I've observed is that all of the best ones observe the ethics. They understand the ethics. We've talked about the ethics in this forum, in our podcasts, but I refer back to it because it is central to the Octologue. It is central to the Holomat that we do things and agree to do things that benefit each other and ourselves on a voluntary basis. Without that, I think our species would be completely doomed unless we can make that the more common experience that people have. I think we are doomed. I think that the way things are going now, the people who are making most of the big decisions don't abide by these ethical rules. These ethical principles, I should say. They're not really rules. And because of that, we're all at risk.
Which is also an opportunity, and that's why the Octologue is such a beautiful thing, because it really opens up all these opportunities. Because a business that adopts a Octologue and adopts a trustworthy stance towards its customers is going to do a heck of a lot better in this environment, because nobody trusts anybody anymore.
So it seems, yes. Well, I say that, and I have to qualify it in that what you and I are calling trust is somewhat different than what most people experience. I say that because the public at large, the people who believe what they see and hear on television, the people who are taken in by the lies, they're trusting, but they're not trusting from a deep place within themselves. They don't know the people they're trusting. They have been given a little bit of information, most of which is false, about the people they trust. Oh, the government is looking out for me. Bull. That's not true, but I trust that it's true. Well, you're at risk if you believe that is true. If you believe that government exists for your benefit, or for the benefit of the public at large, you're at risk because it's a lie.
Well, I mean, kind of in the idea of like the bigger picture, like trade, for example. Imagine you trust some sports star. And so that sports star is going to sell you products. And because the sports star endorses those products, you trust that those are good products.
Right.
But does a sports star really have the ability to know what's a good product, or care even for that matter?
Or have the honesty to tell the truth if he's being paid millions of dollars to go to say what he's saying?
So essentially that leaves you open for the possibility that that product that you trusted to that sponsor or spokesperson that you liked could go seriously wrong.
Absolutely. And it's likely to. It isn't just a distant possibility. It's more often so than not. You know, think what these celebrity people are paid to go in front of a camera and say something. And, you know, they're reading a script. They didn't write the script. Somebody wrote it for them. They read it, got paid for it. I certainly don't trust that kind of promotion. I don't trust that at all.
Which leads us to the next topic, which was along the lines of insecure people. You know, the average person today is really in a very insecure position. The family has been diminished by the system. Essentially, everybody has been individualized, and because of that, there's a weakness, and that is that they really can't trust anybody, and that they're on their own. And so this is why a lot of people look to people like sports stars and actors and actresses as heroes, because they really don't have anybody, and they really haven't been taught to look for what are really good qualities in people or to admire them.
Right.
Just in the sports stars.
Oh, he's a winner. He got the gold belt or what have you, or the gold trophy. Yeah, this is a good point. I think that when people are persuaded to give up their community, whether the community is their immediate family, their neighborhood, their village, their town, their city, the result in this country has been, and there have been studies done on this, you can look it up, that people, I say this country, I say it like I'm in the United States because I'm still, part of my head is in the States.
Been conditioned.
In the States, one of the pervasive truths is that people are isolated from each other. And this has been to the advantage of government. I don't think this means that government supports individuality or individualism as opposed to collectivism. It's more like divide and conquer down to the individual level where everybody feels alienated. You know, when Shirley MacLaine took a bunch of her friends to China, some of them got very upset because they found that the Chinese feel like they belong. They don't feel alienated from their society. And although there's a lot to be said about the what's bad about Chinese society, they're not alienated, and that's a good thing. It was Mao who actually got people to get over feeling alienated by insisting that they attend groups where they attempt to help each other be better communists. And what they wound up doing is becoming better friends. And so everybody in China feels like they're part of a community. They've got people they can turn to, they can talk to, they can confide in. And when Shirley MacLaine took her friends there, some of them had to run away, leave the country, leave China, because they could not stand the anxiety caused them realizing how alienated they were in the States. It just, you know, and of course they took their alienation home with them, where it was a more familiar feeling, but they didn't get over it. It was very disruptive. But that's what people in the States live with all the time. It's one of the reasons I like Mexico, is because here people, families and communities seem to be more cohesive and more willing to talk to each other, trust each other, trade with each other, help each other out, and so on. I think that is a characteristic of Mexican families that has not yet been destroyed.
So, in regard to octologues, strengthening the bonds between people, how does that work?
Oh boy, it really does work. If you have a small group where people are free to converse, where you don't have to have strict rules controlling how people converse, and this is the advantage of it being a small group, and where you have a commitment on the part of every member to act ethically, and the group has actually studied the ethics enough to know what that means, oh, well, we're going to be true with each other. We're going to speak the truth. And we're going to challenge each other if we think that's not happening. Well, after a while, people do challenge each other, and the groups reorganize. Some people leave, some people join. There's a flexibility to the Octologue. And then it'll reach a point when you have sufficient candor among the group members and sufficient time has happened for them to discuss their differences. Eventually, they reach a point which I describe as the group gels, where suddenly something changes. And the visual image that I have that sort of symbolizes that is what happens when you have a super cooled chunk of water. In other words, you got some water and you cool it down. It's very pure water. And it reaches a certain point where it's below the freezing point, but it's still water. And you drop a tiny little bit of dust in there, like a seed, and within minutes, the whole glass of water or bucket of water, whatever it happens to be, freezes. And you can see it happening. It spreads very rapidly, and suddenly the whole thing is frozen solid. That's how I picture the gelling of a holomat or an octologue, that people get to a point where the relationships are solid, the trust is manifested, the ways in which people are there for each other become very obvious. The group reaches a level where honesty doesn't have to be demanded or challenged because it's always there. People just automatically do the honest thing. And when they do that, it changes the level of awareness. People become more aware, and love happens more easily in that circumstance. And I'm talking not just about romantic love, I'm also talking about a more generic kind of love of fellow man, agape kind of love.
Yeah, well, I think that most people experience group behavior, where they go to their church or their school or, where they work. And there's a certain level of understanding that they have with each other that takes them to a certain place. However, at the same time, there's also a level of truth that you really can't get to. If you go to your local truth and you say, or you go to your local church and you say, I'm having some doubts about this religion.
Oops. Right.
And then the rest of them are like, get out.
Yeah, in a lot of churches, and I've talked to church people on a number of occasions, looking to find out if there is a church somewhere that is really open-minded to transform the world in the ways that we are doing here. And the ones that come closest that I've experienced so far are those in the so-called Unity Church. And my experience has been that they are very resistant to taking that broad view of their role in the world. That they say, well, you want to get up and talk to our constituency here, our parish or whatever they call it. You've got to have our congregation. There you go. You want to talk to our congregation, you've got to have a degree in divinity from an accredited school and meet certain arbitrary requirements that our national organization supports. And you just don't get the opportunity to get up and talk to the congregation. You might talk to a few people. There might even be a few people who are in favor of having you talk to the group. But if the bosses, because it's always hierarchic, and if the bosses don't go along with that, if they see it as threatening in any way, if they are concerned that it might take away from their influence or power, they don't allow it. And this is typical of hierarchic organizations, that information always flows downward and is very, very resistant to flow upward. The feedback doesn't go upward.
Again, going back to our original, idea here, the idea that war, hierarchies tend to make bad decisions.
Oh, yeah.
This is certainly another thing that when you're in a war, why would you want to be in a hierarchy?
Right. Right. The usual justification for it is that things happen fast. You've got to have someone make a decision right now. And you can't vote about it. You can't discuss it. There isn't time to think it over. You've got to just make a decision. So it's got to be one person making a decision. And the reality is, it ain't so. The reality is that if someone's contemplating battles and wars, there's time to do a lot of thinking about it before you commit your resources to it. And a lot of time could be spent actually avoiding the war. If the amount of time... As a matter of fact, I remember having a fantasy many years ago of sneaking into the Pentagon at night when there's no one there, as if there is ever a time when there's no one there, and changing all the signs on the doors. So General so-and-so, who's in charge of PSYOPs perhaps, suddenly he finds a sign on his door that says he's in charge of charity or some other ethical purpose. Make all the purposes within the organization ethical purposes and see what people do. Well, if you could get people to accept that kind of a transformation, I think that a big organization like the Pentagon, if it was reorganized as a holomat, could be a fantastic organization supporting peace. What?
Benefit to humankind?
Yes. I look forward to a day when we've got holomats that are bigger than the Pentagon and have more resources than the Pentagon. And the Pentagon just becomes, just another building with some people in it who may or may not ever be trusted with anything.
Yeah. All right, so the next thing is resources. Most wars are certainly fought over resources. Primarily the one these days that everybody points to is oil.
I can't think of a war that wasn't fought for resources. I remember many years ago, I read a book about the history of Judaism and the history of the Jews going back more than 5,000 years. And I was appalled that this very, very well-researched, detailed book, chapter after chapter after chapter after chapter, was war after war after war after war. The history of Judaism is the history of war in that part of the world where they were living. And sometimes the war, the apparent motivation for these wars was not always the same, but it was always about resources. Sometimes it was about arable land. Sometimes it was about water. Sometimes it's about access to seaports. Sometimes slavery. Where can we find some slaves? And so on. But it's always resources. And every excuse that I have seen about wars fought, we want to do away with slavery. We're fighting for our religion. We're going to go fight the heathens and so on. It's all excuses. It's all about resources. I've never heard of a war that I could not track back to some resource that someone wanted to steal from someone else.
Well, in opposition to this idea of resources is essentially the idea that the greatest resource is the human mind.
Right.
And that destroying humans for oil is really idiotic.
It is.
Because those minds are worth a lot more than that oil. Or could be.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, there's all kinds of projects underway right now that aren't getting much support, but they're projects for doing away with the dependency on oil altogether. And while some of them are pretty straightforward, like harnessing the wind, harnessing sunlight, there are some much more sophisticated projects going on. And I think a time will come when some of those will succeed. In fact, I know people who are actually working on creating not one, but several new energy technologies that would do away completely with the need for oil and wind and sunlight. There are other sources of energy available, and every time somebody has come forward with one of them, they've gotten suppressed. They've either been denied a patent, or the patent has been bought up and put on a shelf. A lot of ways that the oil industry fights their competition, and not all of them are nice. They'll go kill people to maintain their power as readily as not. But there are things happening now. Right now, there are things happening that could result in the near future in suddenly almost free energy, really cheap energy, unlimited cheap energy could become available to everyone on a scale where you can run your house on it. You could buy a machine that provides energy for your house forever, and you won't ever have to buy it again. You won't have to make any kind of deal with the local government about it. Now, there are places where they have made it illegal to go off the grid. In Florida, for example.
I think that's pretty much all of the United States.
It may be all over now, but I remember when it started in Florida, when I first heard about someone basically being arrested for not being connected to the grid. Even though they had everything they needed, they were independent, they had energy, they had water, they had light, they had everything they needed, and yet they were punished for not, what this amounts to is forced trade. It's like, you have to buy what I sell whether you like it or not. That was the basic idea behind it. There are people selling energy, and you better be a customer or you could go to jail. Well, that's another kind of warfare. This is same old, same old. It's the same kind of thinking that leads to warfare, just on a smaller scale.
Well, in regard to the Octologue and the larger holomat, if we start working together and start utilizing our brain power to solve problems, quite a few of these problems are going to go away one way or another.
Absolutely.
It doesn't necessarily have to be about the energy or anything like that, but when people have the ability to change things that they don't like through the means of just knowing other people and having influence over other people,
right,
that really is what makes the difference and makes life much more agreeable. It might be a situation where people are living out in the desert. There's nothing to burn, no resources for energy, but working together, they can make a life that is much more agreeable than if they just sit on each other or sit on opposite sides, in conflict because one has rocks and another has, I don't know, a bucket or something.
Right now, I read just recently that there's a new invention has come out now that will actually draw water out of the air in a desert. Even where there's very, very low humidity, this gadget, which is an inexpensive machine as I understand it, I don't know the details, but I understand it's an inexpensive machine that anyone could afford to acquire, and you could have a house out in the desert and supply all your water with that machine. Good, clean drinking water. That would make desert living a lot better, a lot easier for a lot of people, and a lot of places that are basically uninhabitable for most folks would become habitable.
Yeah, which means that we've got a lot more space available.
Yeah. This whole idea that we're overpopulated is absurd when you think about the possibility of inventions like that opening up deserts for A desert could be a comfortable place to live if you had the right tools and equipment and resources and know-how. So why not? Why not?
So the last point is confidence in humanity, and the idea that we have the ability. We've acquired, for however you want to decide that, but as a human, we have a brain, and we have the potential to work with other brains to get things done. What that really means is that we really have a possibility to do just about anything we want. If we can think it in our mind, and if we can explain it to other people, more than likely it's possible that it can be done. Mm-hmm. And what that really means is that there really are no problems that can't be solved if we put enough brain power towards it.
I think that's generally true. In some cases, the solution, it's possible that the only existing solution takes some kind of extreme effort. For instance, right now, I'm very concerned about the radiation in the oceans. And I'm reading about huge, massive, mega die-offs of animals around the world, not just the Pacific Ocean, where I would expect Fukushima to start having that kind of effect. But apparently, there's all kinds of places around the world where there are large die-offs, huge die-offs of fish and marine mammals, seals, orcas, dolphins, you name it. And they're just dying by the thousands, maybe by the tens or hundreds of thousands, and washing up on beaches. Something's going on out there that is very detrimental. It's going to take a big, big piece of effort to figure out what the problem is and fix it, if it's even possible. But if it isn't possible, maybe the next thing is we get off of this planet and we go somewhere else, live in space. I don't know what the solution is going to be, but I do believe humanity has a pretty good chance of solving all the problems we face today, with one exception. And the exception, where I hope that we can get over this one too, has to do with these psychopaths running the world, and they don't care if humans become extinct as long as they believe they will survive. And they're building underground cities in the United States, I'm told, and I've heard from some people who've actually seen parts of them. And I believe that the ultra-wealthy, at least some of them, a significant number of them, are of the belief that they can go underground, destroy all life on the surface, and then come back up to the surface at some time in the future, and by golly, they'll have access to all the resources of the world for a very small number of people. It's insanity. And yet, there are these insane people in positions of power and influence, and it's up to those of us who aren't insane to somehow fix the situation. There's no known way to effectively therapize a psychopath or sociopath. And unfortunately, their numbers are increasing. The percentage of the population that is psychopathic, in my opinion, based on my personal observations, is increasing. That it's getting worse, and that is an accelerating phenomenon that has the potential to make us extinct. And while I'm very much wanting that not to happen, it would be a pity after a couple 100,000 years that humans have existed. It would be a pity if we were to just disappear from the planet because these assholes are doing what they're doing.
Well, I take a little different tact on that one. I think it's more about fear. Fear is the control mechanism that they prefer to use, and so they create fear in these large, massive. We could blow up the world.
Right.
Obviously, that's something to be afraid of. But the reality is how real is that fear?
Yeah.
In the case of most government things, what they tell you to fear isn't necessarily what needs to be feared.
Right.
And it's more the fear itself that should be questioned.
And the people promoting it.
But what I would like to talk about is in regard to like learning to have the confidence in humanity is essentially encompassed in just participating in an octologue.
Right.
That as you start to interact with your friends and neighbors and associates in an octologue, you start to really gain confidence that the world is a better place, that the community and society that you build around you is really the whole game. That the even in the worst circumstance, having a group of people around you that you can trust and work with and be honest with really makes it a great experience. And I think that that's kind of one of the things that, that we were talking about groups like being in a church or something like that. But something that the soldiers kind of experience is the fact that they have to be trustworthy and honest with each other in these life or death situations is kind of that bond that puts them together, that holds them together, is that the fact that they can have somebody that they can trust and be very honest with about who they are and what they're capable of. That makes that, camaraderie between soldiers, something that they value.
I think a lot of that ultimately gives rise to the situation we have where the veterans come home and they want no part of war and they regret having been a part of war. They've changed their worldview. They're more ethical. They see the evils of war that they had no idea existed back before they actually went to battle. And a lot of them, I think that this is what's behind a lot of the suicides of veterans, is that they come to really deeply regret what they did. I worked with veterans in a vet center therapeutically, and most of the ones that came to me were suicidal. Some were homicidal. I was very fortunate that I knew how to work with them so that I never had one of my clients die by suicide or homicide. But all the other people working in the vet center did. They had people dying. And I want the techniques and methods that I use to be more generally known so that there's lots and lots more people out there who can help folks who have been traumatized by war in whatever capacity, whether they are, in communities that have been bombed or whether they are the people who are dropping the bombs, because it's traumatizing to be dropping bombs on people and realizing you're killing people that you don't even see. It's a terrible thing. I also want to say that the idea of the Octologue and its extension, the holomat, the idea really grows out of an understanding of what happens between two people. If you and I can be honest with each other, if you and I can resolve our differences, we can teach 6 more people to do so with us, and then as a group we can be instrumental in the creation of other similar groups that can do the same thing. And it feels so good to do this that anyone who gets an adequate exposure to it is going to want to be a part of it. They're going to want to make it part of their lives. And the fundamental thing about what happens between two people is what is addressed in the soul bonding component of the Octologue. I've really come to see that, largely because of your influence, I've come to see that the soul bonding isn't a separate phenomenon. It's a component of a good Octologue, that every Octologue needs to have at least one person available to them at least some of the time who knows how to pick apart a conflict and resolve it in a peaceful way. And we have the knowledge. We know how to do these things. And we're just getting started. And it's really exciting to me because I've been wanting to see this happening for a long time.
Well, I think, one of the things you pointed out, the dialogue. But honestly, in a lot of cases, and I'm sure most people that are, in the United States understands this, that there's no room for dialogue when it comes to a conflict. When someone says, this is my religion and this is why I believe it, and another person says, well, I'm either an atheist or I'm a different religion. And it's like, well, we just can't come to a conclusion because we don't know how to really have a deep discussion. We don't know how to break apart the reasons of why we believe the things we do. Mm-hmm. And so we're just left, for most people are just left
floundering
with this agreement to disagree. Whereas if you add a couple more people or a third person even to this discussion, that third person is able to kind of keep a little bit of tabs on where people are going. And so if a person makes, a statement or something and then backs himself into it, something else, if it's just two people, that person just won't admit to doing that. But if if there's a third person that basically says, now you did say that, and
here's why I disagree.
Yeah.
And the fourth says it, and the fifth says it, and the sixth says it. And after a while, the person who's got this crazy idea is beginning to question, well, gee, maybe I do need to review that thinking process. And you're right, that can be a very powerful influence in a very positive way.
Right.
But it all comes down, really, ultimately, to how do two people interact. Yes, we can do a wonderful extension from 2 to 8, maybe 9, but the basic principles apply anytime two people interact. The ethics always applies. And sadly, most people don't know the ethics, and they never learn it. Nobody's out there teaching it. We could be teaching it in grade school. Easy.
Yeah, and that's another. There's a lot of the education, just like the education about democracy. That if we take a vote and 51% say that we're going to do that, that's how you get things done. You develop a constituency and you basically get the mass of people to support the great idea. And then even though 49% are against it, they'll learn. And
they'll go along with it. They better.
But that's what people are taught. People are taught that, and so that's that people say, well, that's how we do it.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, that doesn't actually work very well, and that's what leads to a lot of the problems.
Exactly.
We have 40% of the people that are just totally irate with what's going on, and even though they're out of the majority, they're building their majority, and at some point they're going to get majority, and when they do, God forbid those people that used to be the majority, because now they're going to get the wrath of the people that were the minority at one time.
That's right.
And so that doesn't work.
Well,
what works is, what you've outlined in the Octologue.
Right.
And that means that you don't just, it's not a battle. It's a discussion.
When you think about the United States in this context, I can't help thinking, since some 46% of the population doesn't vote, at least 46%, it could be higher, but we know that at least 46% is approaching half the population. You got to wonder.
It's more than that, because there's a lot of dead people voting.
Yeah, well, there's that too. But what I'm thinking about it is, at some point, the fact that most people are so distrustful of government that they won't even bother to vote. They know that their opinion doesn't mean anything, that they can't sway the outcome. What kind of society do we live in if we have no influence over what goes on? I see this as building up to what it could be a cataclysmic terminal event or series of events, or a transformational series of events, which is what I see us doing here in Acapulco. We are doing transformative stuff And I had a beautiful example of that when we had our recent community meeting, and we had a visitor from Canada. And she had never even heard of anarchy until coming here. And someone who she was talking with here, where she was renting a room, she talked with someone who explained it to her. And then she came to our meeting and she's going, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Gee, I wish this happened everywhere. Because she's in the middle of it. She sees the enthusiasm. She hears the suggestions that we're making for plans that we're formulating. And she gets all excited about it. To me, this is how most people would respond if they weren't brainwashed into thinking that the word anarchy means something other than what it means. Anarchy just means we don't have any rulers. We don't know what it's like living in a society without rulers. And we've been propagandized into believing that it would be terrible, when in fact, it's the best way to go.
Yeah.
It works.
So with that, we'll wrap this one up.
I got one more thing I want to bring in here. Right. You had, when we had talked about our agenda for this podcast, you had mentioned the word honor, and how honor plays a part in human affairs. And I want to point out that real honor, as I understand the word, means the same thing. It's like a synonym for integrity, and particularly the integrity involved in being ethical. When a group of people have a valid ethic that they actually live by, and that they require one another to live by, and I mean that by, in an Octologue, I require the other members of my Octologue group to be as integrous as I am, or as nearly so as possible, and they have to at least care about integrity and honesty. That's honor. That's what real honor is. It's not this notion of my country no matter what. It's not a question of my group right or wrong. That kind of loyalty is foolhardy. Real honor comes from understanding the ethics and living by it, and helping other people to live by it. And that's what we're doing. I think that this form of organization that we're embarked upon is the most honorable kind of organization that humanity has ever invented. I think it's fantastic. And I think that it's something that nobody will fully wrap their mind around until they start to experience it. And this is one of the reasons why I want to invite our listening public. Come to Acapulco. Get on the road to Acapulco. Come down here and interact with this community and see what it's like. You too will be almost overwhelmed by what a great experience it is. You probably have never had that kind of experience, and it's probably for most people what they've wanted all their lives. We've got it. Come and get it.
All right. So to kind of close with that honorable thing, there's 73 years ago today, somewhere in the range of a couple 100,000 people were on a beach somewhere shooting at each other and died.
Yeah.
Both the sides, or all the sides, because I guess there were British and there were French and there were Canadians and there were Americans,
right,
and there were obviously Germans and others.
Right.
They all thought they were fighting for something. I mean, they weren't there just because. They thought they were doing something for the rest of the group of people that they represented.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, I guess there is some honor in trying to defend, your loved ones from something evil. Unfortunately, war is not the way to do that.
Right.
And, the best way to do that is to work together with other people, to work together with your neighbors.
Right.
To solve problems. And that's essentially all we're advocating.
Absolutely. Cooperation versus everything else.
Yeah. All right. So the next topic, I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be talking about, but we're going to try and produce one of these at least once a week.
Amen.
And so I appreciate everybody listening, and thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.